Hey everybody, thanks for coming. Um, so let me get my slides kicked off. Share screen. I don't actually, wow, sure hope my screen is sharing. Are my slides showing up? Great. Okay. Um, let's kick this off. So uh, as you can probably tell from the title of the talk, this is going to be about engineering teams and the way that things have changed and how we can try and cope with it. Um, to give you kind of like a little brief agenda, we're going to talk about how having a global pandemic is affecting us, how that impacts productivity, how we can try and actually do remote work under these circumstances, and then kind of like maybe how to try and do a good job of communicating, modeling, recruiting, interviewing, um, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers at the end. Uh, expect it'll probably take vaguely around 15 minutes for the talk, and then we'll have vaguely around 15 minutes for Q&A. So where we're at, uh, it's been about a month since San Francisco and the surrounding counties announced a lockdown, and it's been at least a couple of weeks in most of the US. The good news is that it's possible to build software even while we're staying at home. Unlike a lot of jobs, that's pretty great. The bad news is this isn't actually remote working. At least it's not remote working the way that anyone has ever talked about remote working in the past. This is just working while everyone is stuck at home. That's not the same thing. Uh, the biggest differences between remote work and working while stuck at home are that everyone has to do it without any preparation. Everyone has to do it without a transition period. Everyone has to do it without a really good, solid, supportive plan going in. We're all just kind of like frantically scrambling to try and figure out how to do it. Um, and that's a lot. And then to add really a cherry on top of all of that lot, uh, there's a global pandemic destroying everyone's ability to do all hard things along with the rest of their mental health. So the Bay Area lockdown has already been extended once. There's tons of argument and no consensus at all about when it will be safe to go back to offices, let alone stores, schools. um, no one's getting out of here in less than weeks. And most experts seem to be saying that it's going to be more on the order of months. We need a new mindset. Working from home isn't a temporary workaround, it's just how things are now. So here's maybe some more bad news, but with some good news built in. If you've been working with your team for a while, you likely have expectations of them that you built up working under wildly different circumstances. Uh, those expectations are now probably really bad expectations, unfortunately. Bad in the sense that they're just wildly off base. Uh, this is a global pandemic. There's no childcare. There are sometimes shortages of food and toilet paper. Your team is not firing on all cylinders. You are not firing on all cylinders. Uh, Getting rid of those previous expectations is a great idea. So this is time to create a new definition of success. If you're still here, you're succeeding. If the stress of the botched governmental response to a global pandemic hasn't taken you out, you're succeeding. If you are feeding yourself and you are checking in with the people who matter to you, you are succeeding. If your team and your company still exist, you're not just succeeding, you're incredibly lucky and you have something to celebrate. If your company and team is able to accomplish under all of these circumstances literally anything at all, you are honestly doing better than most. You should feel lucky and proud and accomplished purely based on being here, having capacity to honestly listen to this talk, and You should tell your team that you feel lucky, proud, and accomplished about every single one of them. So as a manager or a team lead or a team member, your job isn't just to kind of get your own shit together. Your job is to model how to work somewhat successfully from home for your team, offer them resources, suggest ways that they can feel more able to cope. The best starting point that I know of for this is a blog post by Alice Goldfuss called Work in the Time of Corona. She offers extremely practical advice about how to improve video calls and offers really good insight into the mental strains, both of working from home and how those mental strains interact with the pandemic. At the end, I'll have a list of links to useful stuff, and Work in the Time of Corona will be included. Then, once you have your situation sorted out, examine how and where you interact with your team. The biggest change switching to all working from home is that communication needs to become dramatically more explicit. Are you explicitly checking in with your team? Are you explicitly supporting your team? Are you providing your team with a forum to check in with and support one another? In offices, norms and expected behaviors are shared by literally sharing space. When you're working from home, norms and expected behaviors really need to be explicitly spelled out, and you need to make your own actions more explicit and more legible. You can't count on walking past someone in the hallway or running into them in the kitchen. You can't expect people to see when it is you arrive, when you leave, what you're looking at, who you're talking to, all of those things that were previously kind of free in an office. Well, now you have to actually do something to make sure that they happen. So do the actions that you want to see, but also let people know what you're doing and why you're doing it so that they know those behaviors are normal and expected. If you say, I'm closing down for the day to be with my family, see you all in the morning, it models work-life balance in a way that just disappearing off of Slack does not. Meetings are optimized for synchronous communication. They assume everyone is available at the same time, they can concentrate and contribute at the same time. Honestly, everyone working from home makes this incredibly dramatically harder, and a pandemic stacked on top of that makes this basically impossible. Schedule less meetings and spend that time instead on communicating. Master the asynchronous communication tools that are available to you and support your team by modeling the behaviors that you want to see, even when it feels like a slog to you. Deliberately make your proposals, your feedback, your discussions all asynchronous. Write documents and pass the link around instead of calling a meeting. Create room for others to chime in later if they weren't available at the moment that you passed it around. Explicitly ask for thoughts from people who weren't online at the right moment, but are relevant stakeholders or experts. Make sure that your team has a way to keep up with each other, even when they're not all working at the same time. Maybe that means daily summaries via a tool like Geekbot. Maybe that means everyone keeping a public work log, public in the sense that it's internal to the company, public amongst everyone who's working together. Or maybe that just means that your team has to designate someone to summarize the work of that team to an internal mailing list. Pandemics predictably include lots of chaos. All that chaos increases the chances that you will likely need to either interview or be interviewed. Interviewing is super hard at the very best of times, and interviewing someone with stuttering audio and blurry video is nowhere close to the best of times. The best advice that I've seen about conducting interviews is in a post by Moishi Letvin called Remote Interviewing. The post is chock full of extremely solid, good advice. And one of those pieces of really good advice that just stood out to me in a huge way that I hadn't seen anywhere else was explicit instructions to acknowledge the strangeness and awkwardness. It is a strange time. It is an awkward time. Pretending it isn't strange and awkward makes things even more stressful which is the opposite of what the goal is. And finally, but very importantly, you want to work to internalize that all of the new behaviors and expectations involved in this need to be sustainable. We can't sprint to the end of the quarantine. We can't outrun a pandemic. We're not going to get anywhere with temporary placeholder behaviors or plans that are going to go away as soon as all this is over, because we don't have an over for all of this to be. Don't expect anyone to be working normally, least of all yourself. Make sure that you're working the amount that you can work. Make sure that your teammates and reports are working the amount that they can work. It is far, far better for you and for them and for your company for all of you to be able to keep doing this rather than for you to be quote unquote normally productive right up to the moment that all of you burn out and lose the ability to do anything useful at all. Be humane and supportive. This is an inhumane and traumatizing time. Ultimately, even though we can't do it in person, the only way that we're going to get through this is by helping each other. That brings us to the end of the prepared bits, and there will be slides and a list of links that we can send out later. In the meantime, I'm going to head back from slides to video chat and see what questions there are. Great. I would love to answer questions if anyone has any.
I've got some questions.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to speak, I think we can turn your mic on if you post in the chat. If you don't want to write a question. Yeah, I wanted to ask about pairing, engineering pairing, and how you might best manage that process remotely.
Sure, totally. If you don't yet have established remote pairing engineering practices, the strongest tools that there's kind of like a spectrum from kind of like most technically effective to kind of like easiest to get going with. Over on the most technically effective end, there's tools like VS Code has a multi-user support thing that I've heard good things about. Gives you everyone kind of like direct access into a running VS Code instance. In terms of giving multiple people control over the same computer, the folks that were previously behind Screen Hero have exited Slack and restarted a new startup called screen.so. There's a kind of like parallel effort called tuple.app, I think is their website. Both of those are very effective, kind of like one screen, both places, one mouse, one keyboard that either one of you can control. And then finally, honestly, Zoom is a great tool for screen sharing and pairing with someone while you're trying to work on something. And you probably already have it set up. Yeah.
Got another one too, if nobody else is chiming in right now.
Go for it.
In terms of like the social aspects of being in an office, like how people congregate around the water cooler and you get small talk and all this, like do you have advice for how to best promote that sort of social interaction remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. Very much in line with the implicit to explicit theme. Water cooler chat can be a Zoom, can be scheduled meeting. If you want something more spread out and more automated, there's a tool called Donut that can automatically select people to just kind of like bug them and be like, hey, you should chat, hang out, catch up. I've had good experiences with all of those options. Ultimately, I think it just comes down to putting in some time and effort to make that sort of like social catch-up time explicit. You know, kind of like lunch hour hangouts where anyone who's around can chat is maybe a reasonable replacement for a water cooler.
Thanks for that. And another one I'm curious about is in terms of like setting up home space, like depending on your apartment or whatever, are there considerations as people transition to, sort of creating a home office under duress that you would recommend?
Yeah, most of what I would recommend is figuring out a way that you can work that doesn't, I guess, ergonomically ruin you. And then kind of like at the next tier of importance down from that, somewhere that gives you really good lighting while you're in Zoom calls. I think those are really good starting points, and definitely the blog posts from Alice and Moishi have sort of more explicit, concrete advice about how to make video calls successful. But honestly, like having a place to work that isn't kind of like a exceptional, this is temporary, that's really the important key part, I think.
It looks like we have a question from James. Assuming this might happen again, to what extent can we expect future things? I think is probably what he means, and I'm curious.
Yeah, future-proof things. Yeah, that makes sense. If you want to be ready to have everyone work at home, make everyone work at home. It kind of reminds me of the governmental requirement that banks force their executives to take a vacation every year. So as a way to kind of like demonstrate that the bank won't collapse if the executive were to fall super ill or die in an accident. If you want to be sure that your team is able to work successfully from home, give them that plan and that transition period that we didn't get this time. Make a plan, provide them with resources, help them get home office working setups, and then make them practice with them. I don't know if that means like regularly scheduled, everyone works from home for a week once a quarter. I don't know if that means everyone takes turns working from home in a rota. I don't know if that means, 1 day a week everyone has to work from home, but you want to make sure that it's not exceptional, that it's boring, that everyone just does it, and that it's not super disruptive. And the only way that I know of to do that is to practice. And then people will get better and adjust.
And we have a question from Ben. How would you recommend going about training new hires, new engineers in this situation?
Yeah, if you're trying to work with new engineers, it's tough. I would say trying to establish with them clear expectations around what you're looking for, and trying to kind of like work with them in the same ways that you're trying to work with everyone else. Make sure that they know what you're looking for, and make sure that kind of like ongoing feedback isn't a surprise as you're trying to figure out how, if you can work with new people. There's definitely some good advice in the interviewing post, and then overall, I think like everyone being at home means at least new hires or trial hires will be on a roughly equal footing with everyone else, so that helps in some ways. But definitely, I would treat new hires as an opportunity to build out sort of your organization's support for how to bring new people on board, because we don't know how long this is going to last. So if you're going to be around, you're going to need a plan, and trial new hire. Yeah, it's a good opportunity to put together a playbook to figure out what people need to know and learn and be told and get help with, and how they can become part of the team. Hope that's helpful. Yeah.
And thank you to all the people attending who participated in the conversation. And yeah, I hope we do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a good, not overwhelming format, I think. Awesome. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. And yeah, hope you're all able to stay safe and healthy and do the amount of work that you can. Great.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.